With that, I'm going to start the day off with our first speaker, Luigi Marini.
Hello, and welcome to How to Contribute and Plans for Next Year. So, first and foremost, we need you, the community. We are a fairly small team, and there's a lot of things we want to do, and we really can't do them without the help of the community. And what that means is that we're not just looking for code contributions, we're looking for ideas, we're looking for feedback. These are great opportunities also for students to get involved. And so what we're going to do now is just take a look at first, how can you contribute? And second, we'll talk about some of the things that we have planned for the next year or so. So when it comes to contributing, we'll look at specifics, but really something to keep in mind is that, the first thing, the easiest thing is to join Slack and ask around how you can help. Propose ideas and see what's going on. We are moving a lot of activities to the GitHub issues. That is not just bugs, but also suggestions and requests. So GitHub issues is a place where you can go and see some of the things that people are working on, or open issues that you can contribute to. There are issues that you could pick up and so on, but also vote on existing issues or add your thoughts. So again, these issues are not just bugs and so on. Also, obviously, you can contribute code and tools, but also tutorials, documentations, and updates of what your project is doing. So we mentioned, on the new website, we have, blogs. So you can add a blog entry. And so again, we want to really emphasize this idea that these communication channels are for everyone, not just software developers. So when it comes to ideas, what we did in the past is we had a wiki page on the NCSA Clowder that was for proposals for new features. So if you had something that you wanted to do in a project and to let everybody else know that there was this idea or that a project was working on something, we had this wiki page, and we would ask you to go there and kind of describe what you wanted to do and why. So that's the past. One of the things about it was that you needed to have an account on NCSA Open Source, which not everybody has, and even though it's a pretty simple process, it's still yet another account to manage. So what we're now doing is we're asking everybody to use the GitHub issues for this. So please go there and create an issue about a new feature that you want. This doesn't have to be a small feature, a small tweak. You can come there and say, hey, what about X, right? And then again, the goal here is to have a place where everybody can go and be part of that conversation. So please, go and check out the GitHub issues. In there's also good first issues label. So if you want to get familiar with the system and you want to start with a small task, we have identified easy tasks that shouldn't take a lot of work, that are good first issues to for anyone to familiarize themselves with the system and also the process of contributing to the system, to Clowder. So once the proposal has gone through some kind of review and discussion, then there's a second step, which is the one of providing some kind of design document of how you're going to modify Clowder. And so we would like for you to do that. And in the past, we were doing that again in NCSA Open Source. You can go and look at some of the previous design documents. We will migrate this to GitHub, to the wiki page on GitHub. But honestly, this document can live wherever. As long as in the issue you point to it, it's important that just we have something that everybody can discuss to make sure that it fits within the design, that there's no flaws to the design, and so the community needs to be able to see what the thinking is before somebody goes and writes a lot of code and then there's some big flaws that were not discussed. So there is in the core repository, there's a contributing.md file that tells you a little bit more information about how to contribute code to the project. Take a look at it. One caveat is when it was first written, we were doing development between both GitHub and NCSA Bitbucket. We're retiring NCSA Bitbucket for this project, so just pay attention to the portions that talk about GitHub, and we will clean up and update this file very soon. Now, if you're not staff or student or faculty at the University of Illinois or Urbana-Champaign, we ask you to sign a contributor license agreement. This is something that the university wants us to do, but it also protects your contributions and makes sure that you're not liable. Some people argue that the license should be enough, but we have been asked to do this, and so and in this, there's some good content there, and all of this is described. The link to it is in that contributing.md, so please take a look at it. Obviously, this is for only contributions to code that is tracked in the Clowder framework organization. We are looking, so if you have code somewhere else, right, an extractor in your organization, in your space, obviously you don't need to do this. We're looking into ways to make this process a little bit less onerous. So there's ways to have GitHub, provide you some simple like checkboxes where you say, yes, I agree, I sign the CLA. But because you're not actually physically signing a document, sometimes it's a little bit easier depending on who you work for. So we'll be looking into that and implementing something like that hopefully very soon. So once you have code and you have described what you're going to do and everything is ready to go and you've been working on it, then we obviously ask you to make a pull request. And this is pretty standard. If you write code nowadays, you're probably very familiar to this. But we do use the Git flow kind of approach that was popularized by Vincent Dreesen and also by Atlassian. It seems a little bit overwhelming at first, but once you understand what it's trying to do, then it's pretty clear when you make a PR against what branch you make it. And so we definitely ask you to have an issue first that includes some kind of design document for complex changes. Ideally, you will be forking your repository into your space, and you'll make changes there, and then you make a PR. And in your PR, you refer to the issue, and you describe what you did and why. So pretty standard stuff. No hard requirements right now. So again, when it comes to extractor and previewers, they can live anywhere. We encourage you to be part of the Clowder framework organization and develop them there so that they have more visibility, but they could be developed in other repositories. If you do, again, like as we've mentioned, please let us know so we can make a fork, ideally just for exposure. Now, we do need to keep a catalog somewhere of both extractors and previewers. And so we've mentioned there's this catalog.clowderframework.org that is almost ready. That's one option, and that's very extractor focused. We also have a wiki page where we list those. We might still keep the wiki page. We really need to pick one. We'll give you more information soon, but we do ask you to make sure that you help us populate these catalogs because it's really helpful. One of the first questions we always get is, well, what can Clowder do? And a lot of that is kind of embedded into extractors and previewers, and so we want to make it easy for people to look at what's available and keeping it up to date. Okay, so let's talk about next year. And obviously, we need to start with Clowder 2.0. So some of you might have heard about the fact that we have been trying and looking at having a version 2 of Clowder, and it hasn't been a bumpy road. So what does it mean for when we say version 2? Well, we're talking about making some modification to the behavior, but really for us, this version 2 is simply due to the fact that the core is a relatively old code base. So as you can see, we started in 2012, and a lot of activity was initially until 2017. Then a lot of the features were in place, and we've been adding features. And again, these are commits, so keep in mind, some people put a lot more in one commit, than others, so it looks a little bit skewed. But the bottom line is, this project has been going on for a while, and a lot of the projects have focused on new features versus maintenance. And so we have been keeping, fixing bugs, but a lot of the dependencies, a lot of the libraries that we build on are kind of gone stale. And so what happens is that it is becoming more and more difficult to maintain and extend, as we have issues with like JVM version 8 not being supported, and we want to do and use the latest play libraries that do things a lot better. Well, we're stuck and we can't do that. So dependence is a big aspect of this. And so we have 3 libraries that we rely on that are not being actively maintained right now anymore. One is our authentication library, Secure Social, and the other 2 are related to how we talk to Mongo. So first is the Salat library, which does the object relational mapping, and then the Casbah library, which is our MongoDB driver. So these are not being maintained anymore. Also, Play has grown a lot over the past 7 years or so. So the version that we use currently is Play 226 from November 2014. I think the latest, and I think there might be actually a newer one, was 287, and that was December 2020. Well, and Play has improved a lot, and the API have changed a lot. So it's not as easy as just upgrading the libraries. The code needs to be changed as well. So one of the biggest problems is that the Scala libraries are compiled for a specific version of Scala, and so one version of a library might be available for a specific Scala version, but another library might not. So it's hard to kind of mix and match and move everything up, in a sane way, and so it becomes this really tangled mess of interdependencies between the requirements of each library and the Scala versions and the Java version. So what we did about a year ago, maybe a little bit more than that, is we started to keep, the plan was you keep functionality intact, just remove some legacy code, a bunch of code that really nobody really uses anymore. It was really just people trying new things, but they didn't stick, and we did that. We're in the middle of upgrading all the libraries, but when we got to the point of the authentication libraries, we're kind of stuck. And we're kind of stuck just because they're different libraries, and the new libraries are incredibly sophisticated, but they're also hard to implement in a code base that has a lot also changing at the same time. And so the other thing that we need to do is, migrate Salat to the official Mongo Scala driver. So again, tangled mess of dependencies, made worse by different Scala versions. And honestly, it's one of those things where you start changing things around. You have 1,000 compiles errors, and you got to go through them and figure out what changed and slowly. And so the morale is greatly suffering because of it. So we're at the point where this approach, we're in the middle of it. We don't want to abandon it, but it's not easy. So because of that, with just recently, a couple of months ago, we started a second approach that is highly related to the first one, which is, okay, well, we know what libraries we want to use, so we start a brand new 2.8 Play 2.8 application with the libraries we want to use, and we start moving the code over a little bit at a time. So this is going okay. It definitely feels better to be able to pull up, some web page and be able to see that everything works fine. But we are realizing that a lot of the libraries have changed so much that we ourselves need to learn these libraries, and we end up rewriting a lot of code. And so again, we find ourselves in a situation where we might have to really rewrite a lot of the core code. Again, this is just the core web app. It doesn't include extractors, previewers, and things built around the code. the core. So what we did do is just, and even more recently, just a month ago, we've started, asking ourselves, well, if we have to rewrite so much of the code, then should we actually look into adopting a more mainstream web application stack and programming language? But one of the things that we want to make sure we don't do is that we don't lose the advantages of Scala and Play. We actually like Scala and Play very much. The language itself, the framework, they're really, really cool. Our challenges are the libraries that we have to adopt on top of those and their complexity. And what we like about Scala and Play is things like the static typing, the beautiful mixing between object-oriented programming and functional programming. There's great performance that can be had because of the asynchronous nature of the framework. The fact that it uses Akka under the hood. It's based on the JVM, which performs really well on the server. So, there's some really good reasons. But productivity is hard in this environment. And if you have if you're wondering, well, why Scala, right? It's not the most popular language. Well, in 2012, Scala was on the rise. Things like Apache Spark were built in Scala and were new and interesting. Twitter was changing its entire backend infrastructure into Scala. There were plenty of tutorials, books, Stacks Overflow were active, and so on. And for us, it was particularly useful because it was written on the JVM, and we had a lot of experience with Java, but we wanted something a little bit more friendly and expressive and fun, and so Scala provided that. And so that was why. But that was 2012. In 2021, Scala is just not as popular. It's still a great language, but what has happened in approach 2, what we have seen is that, again, the libraries might be great, but they're hard to learn. There's not as much community understanding around them. And so it's really hard to get started, and that makes things go a little bit slow. So if you were to rewrite the core, then what would we pick? So for us, I think Python would be ideal. We have familiarity and experience with things like Node.js and Ruby on Rails and Express and so on. But Python is ubiquitous in scientific computing, and it also has a strong presence in web application development. The extractors are written in it. We have plenty of experience doing, writing Python code. Also, recently there are some changes to the core language that are incredibly interesting to us because they give us some of the things that Scala and Play were giving us that Python could not give us at the time. So now they have this async IO built into the library that gives us, performance and a model more similar to Play Akka actors. That is really important for web application development. And also there's type hints, which is not the same as a statically typed language, but it's also one of those things that we like about Scala because it's really nice to be able to look at the code, be able to jump around easily, knowing what the type of the object is, and so on. It just makes you a lot more productive and the code more robust. And so this helps. So we've been looking, at what we would use if we were to do this, and kind of starting to think about prototyping something. And obviously, what we're looking at is Django because it's incredibly popular and it has a lot out of the box. But unfortunately, it looks like the support for MongoDB is not as good as it could be. Flask is something that we've built a lot of services with. It's great, but maybe it's a little bit bare bones. It's not opinionated, and that's good, but you have to build a lot around it. And if we're rewriting some code, right, we want something that hopefully will help us from the beginning, knowing that we know what we have to implement, right? We're not trying to reinvent the entirety of Clowder. We're just trying to, port the core to a different language. And then there's Fast API, which is the new kid on the block, which is incredibly exciting. A lot of people are excited about it. And the reason is because it has from the ground up support for things like async IO and type hints that we've mentioned, thanks to other libraries that is built on Starlet and Pydantic. And it's amazing to go through documentation and look at it and seeing all the things we love about Play and Scala, a lot of the things. be available in one shape or form in Fast API. But it is the new kid on the block. It's a small team. It's unclear, if it's going to be a good choice to go with this, for long-term sustainability. So the other advantage of potentially kind of rewriting the front end is that if we do rewrite the front end, if you remember, Clowder's front end is two somewhat separate APIs. One is the HTTP JSON API that clients use, and the other one is the HTML, JavaScript kind of endpoints that give you what you see in the browser. Now, because we have this extensive web API, we actually could separate the front end from the server side and have it as a kind of rich client app in the browser, right? And there's a lot of options there, and we're gonna, if we are gonna do this, we're probably gonna end up using something like React.js, and we want your feedback about all of this, so please put it in the chat. And the reason is because not only is it established and well documented, and there's the advantage of being able to use React Native, but more importantly, we have internal experience building apps with it, and so we know, right, what we're doing to a certain extent. So we need to rely on things that we know very well. This decoupling of front end and back end will also be very good for long-term sustainability of the framework. So if, and it's a big if, we were to do this, that is this rewrite of the core, and again, this is not a given, it's just an approach we're investigating, we would start small, just core features, and build over time and see how things go, what the experience is like, and what our productivity is like. We would definitely keep 1.x alive for much longer, because we understand that people are using it, we are using it, so we can't move to 2.0 as fast, so we will have to do more of that. And the other thing is we might be able to make some of the changes that we have always wanted to make a little bit easier, because we are implementing some things from scratch using the kind of blueprint that is the current code base. So that would simplify that aspect. So, do we want to do a rewrite of the core? No. But it might be the best solution long term. And so we need your help and your feedback in helping us figure out how to move forward. So over the next 6 months, we will continue to investigate all three approaches, and continue to work on all three approaches. After the 6 months, we'll basically just, by that point, we will know how we will move forward. If we can count on contributions from the community, approach 3 might become more feasible. It's also a little bit easier to get into because it's Python and people already know it, and there's a lot of work being done in it. Again, even with approach 3, we are planning on keeping the same API, the extraction bus, backend services, everything. It will remain the same. So we're not changing any of that. So we're not starting from scratch. But if you are interested in contributing to Tool, please do get in touch with us on Slack. Mention something in the chat today. And I think we might have a breakout session on this later on today. So let's take a quick look at other activities for the next 6 months. So let's put Clowder 2.0 aside for a second, and let's look at things that we plan on doing. One most important thing is keep growing the community. Again, I hope that this All Paws are showing you that there's a lot of activity going around Clowder that is really exciting. We want to work with you to solve the problems you need to solve, and we want to take your contributions in. We want to open up our development process to as many people as possible as is feasible. And so we want to help new contributors to get on board, and we've tried to do this, but we know that sometimes PR take a little bit longer to review. And that's not because they're not a priority for us. PR, from the outside, it's simply a matter of finding the time. but we are listening, we're there, we want to encourage everybody, we want to support everybody however we can. We're going to continue to have regular monthly releases, so that's something that we like. We want to continue to grow the Slack workspace. We have had some really good successes with it, and we think that the more people get on it, not just software developer, the more fun and interesting it will be. We would like to go back to a regular monthly blog release kind of schedule, again, to keep the community fresh on what's going on, and also anyone interested in Clowder coming to it. There's so much going on, but they might not be aware of it. So blogs, on the main website are a great way to do this. And so really, what would you like to see, right? Please let us know what are the things that are important to you that you think would help, grow the community. Just recently, we have had Lisa and Summer, UX designers and CSA, starting to look at Clowder and trying to figure out together, what is the intention of Clowder, how does it currently work, and how can we make those intentions more explicitly, how we can make that experience a little bit easier. We know that there are a lot of aspects of the Clowder UI and the Clowder experience that are very confusing, and we just haven't really had much time to really go into those. We do some improvements, increments once in a while, but especially with Clowder 2 on the horizon, this is a great opportunity to think about bigger changes. And so we're super excited to be working with them. There's some preliminary wireframes here, hot off the press. But again, these are very simple starting points, and we really look forward to see what we can do. We also, this is ongoing, this started this year, the NDS Lab Workbench integration has been going on since the beginning of the year. If you're not familiar with Workbench, it is a framework for launching containerized applications in the browser. So it can include like a web UI, like Jupyter Notebooks, and you can create these really nice recipes to run applications like CCAN, for example, you can see there, or Cloud9 inside the browser. And what the team is doing, this team is doing, is looking at making it easy to basically mount data, share data between a Clowder instance and a Workbench instance behind the scenes, so that users can use all sorts of tools on data in Clowder without having to kind of download it to your machine and then upload it back to the lab's Workbench. So we're really excited about this work, and it's proceeding well. Service model. So we want, for those of you and that don't have the ability to maintain and set up a Clowder instance on your resources, we want to have a service model, a fair service model that provides instances to the community. And so we're looking at ways to do this. And right now, the direction we're going in is for small free instances. We will have this Clowder hub that is going to be a central hub that will be free for users to use as long as the data and the compute stays below a certain limit. The initial funding for this will be supported initially by NCSA. Obviously, long-term, the support needs will need to be discussed, but it makes it easy for people to have an instance that they can count on. And so right now, if you go to the main Clowder website, there is a demo instance. That's demo. We can support and back up the data. We say that on it. This would actually be an instance that we would support in terms of backing it up and making sure that everything is good and people can rely on it. Larger instances obviously will be managed independently, and that will follow kind of a cost model that we are developing. Another thing that we're doing is we are NCSA is setting up an account with DataSites, which allows you to provide digital object identifiers, DOIs, and what it will let us do is for those instances at NCSA, it will let us provide the community with the ability of minting DOIs. So we will provide that ability in instances like Hub, the Clowder framework, or in other project-specific instances that we maintain at NCSA. Now to do that, we will be developing, this is not done yet, we're just now starting, we will be developing code in Clowder that allows you to mint DOIs. It will freeze the data set, pretty typical stuff that you expect. So that code, if you want to use it somewhere else, for an instance that you maintain on your premises, and you have a way to mint DOIs through data sites or some other resource, then hopefully you can reuse the code. We also, regarding publishing, for the seed NSF seed project, we had a staging area and a publishing pipeline that we really liked. We want to kind of update this and modify it slightly to make it a little bit more self-contained and leverage the extraction bus, which, as you have seen, it's more than just extraction now, so that we want to still provide what it used to provide, which is an easy way for you to take a data set in Clowder and then have some special specific code and interaction with long-term repositories. For example, the library, at Illinois or any other long-term repository. So you have a simple way to basically publish to these external repositories for long-term preservation. It's something that we really liked and we really would like to be able to do again. Now, there's a couple of smaller things that we do want to do on the short term that always come up. One is file versioning. So right now, for provenance reasons and because it was the easy thing to do, we said, well, every time you want a new version of the file, you add a new file. But this fragments the space quite a bit, makes it really hard to follow things. There is really no technical reason to do this. So we're going to do this in a couple of phases. One is we're going to let the user track different versions of the file bytes, but everything else stays the same. So the file, the metadata, information about it, you're going to be able to go back in time and look at older versions of the bytes of the file. Everything else kind of as one entity. Phase 2, and we don't know when we're going to get to this, will be worry about the metadata around the file and how you can make sure that it's still relevant with a newer version of the bytes. So obviously that requires a little bit more, thinking and code, and so we need to, it'll take a little bit more time. Speaking of fragmentation, so right now, as you have seen, data sets, to share a data set with the users inside a Clowder instance in private, you need to create a space. This is fine, but it leads to space fragmentation, and there's a lot, sometimes I just want to take a data set and say, hey, I want to share with you, and I want to give you, editor permissions on it. You can modify it, because as we have mentioned, the data set is kind of the core, resource. So this would basically look like what we do for spaces, but at the data set level, we think that there's enough in the code to not make this too cumbersome, but we still have to start this work. And the other thing that is somewhat related to the publishing aspect to a certain extent, but really, one of the things that we also want to do on the short term that we've been talking about for quite a bit is the ability of having a distributed indexing and search over Clowder instances that trust each other, right? So if you have all these Clowder instances and they're all different labs, different physical locations, well, a user going to one of them, for example, doing a query against Clowder A, well, might want to be notified that there is some relevant information available at Clowder B. And so the idea here is that the way we're thinking about this right now, and we're thinking of implementing this, is the search indices will be talking to each other. So you might get results when you do queries in Clowder A about Clowder B that will be clearly labeled. And then if you go and want to take a look at them and interact with them, you will be redirected to Clowder B, and then you will have to authenticate again. But if you have that single sign-on, it might be pretty straightforward, and then you get into Clowder B. So, in conclusion, I think, it's pretty clear that Clowder is not just software, but a community that, built around research data problems. And we have used Clowder to solve a lot of these problems or prototype solutions to them. But we do want to recognize that, we're really, really thankful of having this great community, and we want to do our best to grow that community, and with that, grow the software, and the framework as a whole, but also the kind of problems that we are able to solve. So thank you. Questions?
Thank you so much, Luigi, for that great talk. It's great to know all the opportunities there are for folks to get engaged. Oh, I do see one in the chat. Can DOIs be linked to extractors or workflows?
So as with everything, we'll probably, the ability of minting a DOI on a data set will also be available in the API, and as such, it will be available to clients of Clowder and also extractors. So if you wanted to trigger the minting of a DOI as part of a workflow, you could do that. Now, once the DOI is minted, we have to freeze the information. So that will happen, and after that, the data set will be frozen. But yes, you will be able to trigger from an extractor workflow. Thank you for your question.
All right. Well, thank you again, Luigi. We'll be hearing more from him again later.